My CEO's daughter became general manager for a week. On day one she fired me and bragged she only kept useful people. Her dad came back screaming, "You fired who?" And then it got worse when the board found the buried settlement. When the email came in about the town hall, I assumed it was another quarterly pep talk. You know the type. We're a family. Let's circle back. Here's a new mug with the company logo. But the moment Gary strode onto the little makeshift stage in the warehouse, something felt off. He looked peaceful, like someone who just got back from a meditation retreat or survived a heart attack and was now drinking kale smoothies and reading Rumi. "I want to start by thanking all of you," he said, his voice weirdly soft. "For the years of service, for the loyalty, for the grit. That's why starting next week, I'll be stepping away for a spiritual sabbatical." I blinked. Spiritual sabbatical? He wasn't retiring. He wasn't sick. He was just done? "Of course, leadership continuity is key," he continued, placing a hand gently on the mic like it was a church pulpit, "which is why I've asked my daughter, Seraphina, to step in as interim GM. My breath caught. Seraphina? Fresh out of grad school, Seraphina? The girl who once wore heels to a team hike because they were Prada and had rubber soles? A few scattered claps broke the silence, mostly from the executive row. I didn't move. Neither did the guys in logistics behind me. I swear I heard one of them whisper, "You've got to be kidding me." Then she appeared, Seraphina Van Houten, in a trench-length cream blazer, tortoiseshell sunglasses, inside, and a tablet clutched like it was her weapon of choice. She took the mic like she'd been waiting her whole life to stand on that platform. "Hi, everyone," she chirped. "I'm thrilled to bring a new era of modular agility to our operation. Blue-collar reinvention is here." I heard a forklift somewhere in the back stall with a loud choke. Like, even it couldn't believe what it was hearing. Seraphina clicked her tablet. A large screen behind her lit up with a new org chart. Names were moved, titles reassigned. One entire team, project design, was replaced by a floating innovation flex pod. I scanned the chart for my name. I was still there, senior operations manager, but my team gutted. She kept talking, dropping words like value pivots and core disruption as if the whole staff had MBAs and bullshit. "And starting today," she said brightly, "we'll be evaluating roles for long-term fit." That's when I knew something bad was coming. A few minutes later, she pointed to a smiling HR rep in the corner who began whispering to two employees I had worked beside for years, Marcus and Danielle. Within an hour, both were gone. No goodbyes, no email farewells, just escorted out like they'd committed crimes. I just stood there, stomach tight, hands clenched at my sides. I'd survived 12 years in this company, survived 3 recessions, 2 union audits, and 1 cement truck fire in the lobby. But Seraphina scared me. Not because she was cruel, because she didn't even know what she didn't know. And people like that, they break things. They don't even notice when they do. I looked down at my phone where I had just texted Marcus. "Let me know when you land. We'll grab lunch. I'm so sorry." The message sat unsent. The screen read, "Message failed to deliver." Jesus. This was really happening. The calendar invite landed at 7:48 a.m. with the subject line so vague it felt like a trap. Sync Ray, Role Visioning, Executive Office, 9:30 a.m., Seraphina Van Houten. I stared at it, my coffee halfway to my mouth. No agenda. No CCs. Just me and the queen of modular chaos. By 9:25, I had convinced myself it was about reassignments, a title shuffle, maybe a new reporting structure I need to decode for the ops team. But the second I walked into the executive suite and saw her, I knew. She was perched behind Gary's old glass desk, legs crossed like a CEO on a photoshoot break. Her tablet was open, not on financials, not org charts, but a pastel swirl of color palettes, sage green, mauve, something called urban dusk. She didn't even look up. "Lorna, come in. Close the door, would you?" she chirped, as if we were about to review a Pinterest board, not dismantle a life. I closed the door slowly, my throat already dry. Seraphina took a sip of something frothy and pale from a mason jar. "Matcha mushroom collagen infusion," she said, tapping the straw. "You'd love it or not. Anyway, let's sync." I didn't sit. "Before you say anything," she said, setting down her jar and flicking her screen to some kind of cascading chart, "I want to thank you. You've clearly done a lot for the company historically." Historically. She smiled brightly, all teeth and zero understanding. "But the thing is, we're pivoting structurally. We're leaning out ops and aligning more with vision-based leadership. It's not about what was, it's about what will be." I stared at her, waiting for real words. She gave me none. "I'm sorry. What exactly are you saying?" I asked, finally sitting, though I already felt like I was sinking. Seraphina folded her hands like she was about to recite a poem at a poetry slam. "I'm saying your role no longer aligns with the vision. We're not in an operations-heavy phase anymore. We're modular, decentralized. The future is frictionless." My ears rang. 12 years through layoffs, reorgs, an actual gas leak that shut the yard down for 3 weeks, and she was firing me with buzzwords and a beet-colored smoothie. Before I could respond, she reached beneath the desk and clicked something, a small silver button embedded near her keyboard. A second later, the door opened. 2 security officers stepped in. Not janitorial staff, not HR, actual private security. One stood by the door, the other moved beside me. Seraphina gave them a sunny nod, then turned back to me. I've asked HR to mail your exit packet. It felt less transactional that way. My jaw clenched. You can grab your things. We're allowing a 15-minute wrap-up window. Wrap up. I stood up slowly, numb, and left the room without a word. My heels echoed down the hallway like punctuation marks on a joke I didn't get. Back at my desk, I took the plant. The mug I'd had for a decade. The one from the first ever company barbecue. A folder of receipts, not much else. No one said a word. Not Tanya, not Alan. They just kept typing, and I walked out like a ghost. I didn't cry, not on the walkout, not in the parking lot, not even when I tossed the dying succulent and chipped best boss ever mug onto the passenger seat. I just drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles throbbed. By the time I got there, the sun was already gone. I didn't bother with dinner. I didn't even take off my shoes, just sat on the couch in my work clothes, jacket buttoned, badge still clipped to my lapel like some kind of cruel joke. 12 years undone in 12 minutes. The living room was dim, except for the glow of the porch light outside and a blinking red light from the router in the corner that had been glitching for weeks. I stared at nothing, at everything. At the crack in the ceiling, I kept meaning to patch. At the framed company photo from the annual build-a-thon, still crooked on the wall. Then somewhere around midnight, I moved. Not out of hunger or anger, just instinct. I went to the kitchen, pulled the step stool out from behind the trash can, climbed onto the counter, and reached into the dusty cabinet above the fridge, the one labeled seasonal. Behind the holiday trays and emergency candles was the thing I hadn't touched in years, a battered black laptop in a neoprene sleeve. I'd labeled it break glass. Back then, I thought I was being funny. But now the joke felt different, almost prophetic. I plugged it in at the kitchen table. It whirred to life slowly, like a thing waking from a coma. After some fighting with the Wi-Fi and an outdated security patch, I was in. The folder was still there. Red font, all caps. Do not open unless you're done. I clicked. Inside, subfolders labeled by year, screenshots, expense reports, discrepancy logs. That time Gary billed the company for a client spa retreat that turned out to be a weekend with his third wife. That vendor contract resigned with 0 review. A memo Seraphina once accidentally emailed me about gutting compliance bloat. Every item had a date. A paper trail. Not revenge. Not even spite. Just insurance. I opened a new tab and typed in the name. Trisha Kendall, Audit Committee. Forensic accountant, still on the board last I heard. They used to call her the Blade for how surgically she took down financial fraud. I drafted a short email. No name. No sender. Just a masked account routed through an old firewall breach I kept for emergencies. Subject, break glass attached. A ZIP file. Body, just one line. They thought no one was watching. I hit send, closed the laptop, then I sat back, still fully dressed. And for the first time that day, I smiled. Seraphina strutted through the break room like it was a runway, flanked by 2 advisors she'd flown in from a branding firm in LA. One of them wore a linen suit with no shirt. The other had a men bun and used the phrase worker experience as a storytelling medium. I watched the all-hands recording from my kitchen table, sipping coffee like I was reviewing surveillance footage. The new HR director nervously nodded through a PowerPoint about culture cleansing. Someone in the background whispered, "What the hell does talent composting mean?" While they held brainstorming sessions with words like vibe scaffolding and visual oxygen, I was inside something much more real, the company's forgotten back end. A graveyard of old servers, dusty directories, and shared folders no one had touched in years. Turns out, Seraphina never revoked my system credentials. Maybe she didn't think to. Maybe she assumed it had it covered, or maybe she didn't know those systems even existed. I logged in through an old VPN key buried in my cloud archive, and within minutes, I was wandering the digital halls like a ghost. No one saw me. No one remembered I had the keys. The buried folder was in a strange place, a mislabeled legal drive titled Q4 Vendor Reviews, Legacy. Deep inside, behind 6 subfolders and a corrupted zip file, was a lone PDF. Agreed terms. VM Consulting Group. Confidential. I opened it. At first, it looked like a vendor contract, generic language, scope of services. But then I saw the payout amount, $300,000. The vendor, VM Consulting Group. The description, organizational audit and wellness mediation. But there was no project ID, no matching billing and accounting, and no point of contact. Just an address, a P.O. box in New Jersey, and a tax ID tied to an LLC that didn't exist 6 months ago. My chest tightened. I cross-referenced the recipient ID with our 1099 logs from the prior year, and there it was. A one-time payout approved under Vendor Diversity Initiative, but I remembered that name, VM Vanessa Mayfield. She'd been the compliance director 2 years ago. She vanished suddenly. No farewell email, no LinkedIn update, just gone. Rumors swirled back then. Hushed voices about a senior VP, now retired, and a complaint that had gone away. The whole thing wrapped in legal tape and silence, except it hadn't gone away. It had been buried, paid off, and signed right there in the corner of the PDF by Gary Van Houten, dated 3 weeks before his spiritual sabbatical. There it was, the rot. I didn't hesitate. I created a new masked email thread to the board's audit committee and attached the PDF. Subject line, clarification requested. Q4 vendor payments, no name, no threat, no demand. Just one breadcrumb on a trail of firewood. Then I logged out of the system, deleted the VPN trace, and closed my laptop like a coffin lid. Let Seraphina have her smoothies and mood boards. Let her advisors play dress-up with job titles. I was building something else, a reckoning, and it had just been invited to the table. Gary Van Houten stormed into the lobby at 8:13 a.m., 48 hours ahead of schedule. He didn't look like a man fresh from a spiritual sabbatical. He looked like a man who'd been handed a spreadsheet soaked in gasoline. The serenity was gone. The beard had been trimmed. His usual $1,000 loafers were covered in airport dust. He didn't wait for an escort. He didn't greet the front desk. He walked in like he owned the place because for most of his life, he had. "Where's Seraphina?" he barked. The receptionist stammered something about a leadership alignment breakfast. Gary didn't pause. He shoved through the glass doors and headed for the executive suite. On the 8th floor, Seraphina was mid-speech, smiling as she introduced Brody and Kyle to a room full of confused project managers. "These two are our transformation architects," she said, beaming. "We're decentralizing accountability and unleashing narrative capital." Then the door slammed open. Gary's voice boomed across the room like a wrecking ball. "What in the absolute hell is going on here?" The silence that followed was beautiful. Seraphina's smile faltered, then returned like a reflex. "Dad, you're early." "Don't dad me." Gary crossed the room with purpose. "Why are there 12 unapproved vendor contracts in this quarter's spend? And why are 5 of them registered to a company with no IN on file?" Kyle took a half step back. Brody looked at the ceiling. Seraphina blinked. "I've been driving strategic pivots," she said carefully. "Empowering agile ecosystems." "Cut the jargon," Gary snapped. "You're not at a panel in Brooklyn. You're running a construction firm." He pulled a folder from under his arm, slammed it on the table. The cover page, VM Consulting. Payment authorization and terms. Seraphina's color drained. "You signed this," Gary said. "You, without review, without legal. You signed a $300,000 hush payout disguised as vendor services. Do you even know what that is?" "I thought it was legit," she whispered. "It came from your approval stream." "I hadn't touched a contract in 2 months, he shouted. "You've terminated 47 employees. You restructured ops into a creative pod, and you gave 2 influencers control over budgeting software." "They're not influencers," she cried. "They're vision consultants. Where are they now?" The room turned. Brody's chair was empty. Kyle's seat sat pushed in, still warm. Gary looked around slowly. "Your advisors just disappeared mid-meeting." Seraphina swallowed hard. "They told me you were played," Gary said, quieter now. "And because I trusted you, we were all played." Her hands shook as she picked up the folder. Her voice dropped to a tremble. "They said I could fix the culture, that I'd be taken seriously." "You signed off on a harassment settlement," Gary said, voice like concrete. "You approved a shell company tied to a competitor. You cleared severance packages for people who kept this place alive for a decade." Seraphina's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, he didn't see his daughter. "Just a liability." "You've done enough," he said. Then he turned to the room, adjusted his cufflinks, and muttered, "I want a full audit, and get the board on the phone." The damage wasn't done, but it was finally visible. The diner was half empty and smelled like burnt toast and too much lemon cleaner. I slid into the back booth just as a semi rolled past the windows, its roar masking my heartbeat. I didn't know if she'd show. Vanessa Mayfield hadn't been seen in nearly 2 years, not since she'd vanished from the compliance director role without so much as a goodbye. Some said she moved to Arizona. Others whispered about a settlement with strings so tight, even the legal team walked on eggshells. But she showed. She walked in wearing jeans, a windbreaker, and no makeup. Her hair was shorter, darker, her presence smaller than I remembered. Still, her eyes were the same, calculating, watching. She spotted me and headed over. "Lorna," she said, sliding into the booth. "Vanessa. Thanks for meeting." She gave a slow nod and picked up the menu, flipped it open, then set it down without reading it. "I almost didn't," she said. "I know." A beat passed. "You were right about the file," she said quietly. "VM Consulting. They used my initials. That wasn't an accident." I leaned forward. "The 300K? She nodded. "It was hush money. I didn't want it. I wanted them to do something about him." But Gary made it clear. Either I took the payout and vanished, or I'd be branded as unstable and difficult. A compliance director, no one would hire again. And now? I asked. She smiled bitterly. Now the NDA expired last month. I checked. They didn't even bother renewing it. Probably figured I'd just stay gone. I reached into my bag and slid a plain black USB drive across the table. This is everything I have. The settlement trail, the shell company registration, even the internal chat logs they thought were deleted. I kept backups. Old habit. Vanessa stared at it for a moment, then picked it up and tucked it into her jacket. I'll back it all up. If Trish moves forward, I'll testify. We sat in silence for a while. The waitress came by, and we both ordered coffee we wouldn't drink. Outside, it started raining, just enough to smear the streetlights across the glass. Inside, the diner buzzed with soft rock and silverware on plates. And in the corner booth, two women quietly stitched together a case that could burn a building to the ground. You know they'll come after you, Vanessa said finally. If this goes public, I'm counting on it, I said. She gave a dry laugh. You always were the last one standing. No, I said, reaching for my coat. This time, I'm the one drawing the line. We walked out into the wet night. She turned left. I turned right, but the fuse was already lit, and the board would never see it coming. The conference room on the 22nd floor was never meant to hold bloodlettings. And yet, that's exactly what it felt like as Trisha Kendall dropped the red folder in the center of the polished oak table with a soft, ominous thud. She didn't bother with a preamble, just slid it across the table to the chair, adjusted her glasses, and said, "We need to talk about the Van Houtens. 10 board members, 3 on video, 5 shifting uncomfortably in their leather seats." Gary sat at the far end, hands folded, tie too tight. Seraphina sat beside him, mascara barely concealing the puffiness under her eyes. Her voice had trembled when she introduced herself earlier as acting GM. Now she stayed silent. Trisha flipped open the folder. Each page had a tab. "This," she said, tapping the first, "is a disguised payment. $300,000 routed through a shell LLC registered under a competing firm's umbrella, labeled as vendor mediation services. No service was ever rendered. It was, in fact, a sealed settlement tied to a harassment complaint." Gary didn't blink. Trisha moved to the next tab. "This is the PDF authorizing the payout signed by Gary Van Houten, countersigned by his daughter 2 weeks before she assumed interim leadership." Seraphina flinched. "I didn't know what it was," she said, voice small. Trisha didn't acknowledge her. "And this," she continued, pulling out a packet stapled with red tape, "is a cross-index list of reassignments and department terminations executed without board consultation, all initiated by Seraphina and rubber-stamped under Gary's residual permissions." Haley, the board's loudest traditionalist, leaned forward. "Trish, you're turning this into a vendetta. Everyone makes bad calls. You're framing these like crimes?" "I'm framing them like facts," Trisha replied, calm and brutal. "Facts backed by invoices, server logs, and now first-hand testimony." The screen behind her lit up with a scan statement, "Vanessa Mayfield's, dated and notarized." The room went still. Seraphina's face drained of color. "This wasn't all me," she whispered. "I was trying to fix things. I was doing what I thought you wanted." Gary didn't defend her. Instead, he let out a long breath, leaned back in his chair, and said softly, "You've done enough." A silence fell across the table like a curtain. The chair cleared his throat. "In light of the findings presented today and pending further investigation, the board will now vote on immediate suspension of Gary Van Houten and Seraphina Van Houten from all executive functions, effective immediately." No one raised a hand in protest, not even Haley. 10 votes. Unanimous. Badges deactivated. Keycard access revoked. Gary didn't speak as he stood. Seraphina reached for her father's arm, but he pulled away. They exited together, but separately. He walked fast. She trailed behind, swallowing sobs she couldn't hide anymore. Trisha closed the folder, folded her hands. "Next item on the agenda," she said, eyes scanning the room, "is interim leadership." The chair turned to her. "Do you have a recommendation?" Trisha smiled, not with smugness, but with finality. "I do." She opened her tablet, tapped once. "Lorna Halstead." And just like that, the room nodded. The fall was over. The rebuild had just begun. The internal email hit inboxes just after 6 a.m. Subject, Interim Regional Leadership Update from Board Communications to all staff. There was no ceremony. No photos. No announcement with bullet points or vision decks. Just one quiet line in the body of the message. Effective immediately, Lorna Halstead will serve as Interim Regional Director. She will report directly to the board. That was it. No mention of Gary. No mention of Seraphina. No long goodbye or grateful for their contributions. Gary's name was buried in a legal disclaimer footer. Seraphina's wasn't mentioned at all. By 8:02, I was back. I walked into the building wearing the same black blazer I'd been fired in. Same badge clip, new badge. The old photo, same face, but my eyes looked different now. Straight, still. Like someone who'd made peace with the fire, people noticed. They didn't say much, just stood a little straighter when I passed. Some gave nods. One of the electricians muttered, "Welcome home," as he held the elevator. I didn't respond, Not because I was trying to be cold, because I wasn't ready to speak yet. I hadn't spoken inside this building since Seraphina pressed the buzzer and ended 12 years with a smile and a smoothie. The elevator dinged. I stepped out onto the executive floor. Gone were the flower carts and neon signage Seraphina had installed as part of her brand refresh. The sliding wall of digital art was turned off, stuck on an unfinished slide of a slogan that read "Work but reimagined." I passed the war room Kyle and Brody had once camped in, empty now, their whiteboard still littered with arrows and post-its, half of them spelling nonsense like narrative flow funnel and EQ scaffolding. I opened the door, pulled the plugs on the wall monitor, and shut the lights off. Done. Next, the Zen Alignment Lounge. I tapped in, stepped over 3 unused yoga mats, and shut down the aromatherapy unit. The smell of lemongrass and lavender clung like desperation. Then, finally, I stood outside the corner office, Gary's old one. The plate was gone. No one had replaced it. The door sat unmarked, closed, waiting. I rested my hand on the handle. 12 of fire drills, concrete pricing sheets, payroll audits, and hard hats in summer heat. 12 years of fixing what others broke and staying late so no one else had to. They tried to erase me with a calendar invite. Instead, I erased them with receipts. I opened the door, stepped inside. The desk was clean. The chair still creaked the same. I set my bag down, booted up the system, and with one click, I archived the remaining project labeled Elevated Modular Rebrand. Gone. Outside the window, the cranes were moving. The job sites were alive again. This time, they'd be run by people who knew the difference between a blueprint and a buzzword. I leaned back in the chair, not triumphant, just ready.